everyone. I'm Karen Foley, the host of Authors Night, and we have a very important book for all of us who live right here on and in the Santa Monica Mountains. It's called Range on the Edge. I have the two gentlemen here who have made the book as important as it is. One, Matt Jaffe, who wrote the words, and Tom Gamache, who did the photography. Now, from what I know about Matt, he's written about Southern California for over 20 years. He's an award-winning and very respected author on the culture and the environment here in Southern California. Now, Tom Gamache is an iconic photographer here in the area who's lived in the Santa Monica Mountains for over 20 years. He's an internationally recognized landscape art photographer who's worked in more than 100 national parks throughout the country and has had his photographs published in National Geographic and LA Times and so forth. So how did the two of you meet, and how did you start working together in general, and then what led you to doing the book together?
Mm-hmm. You're first, Matthew.
Okay. I was a senior writer at Sunset Magazine for over 20 years, and one day I received a call from Tom, who at that point I didn't know, saying that he was interested in doing some photography for the magazine and that we should get together and talk about some ideas. And he came into the office, and Tom, being Tom, is quite a presence when he walks in, and I was immediately struck by, who is this guy? And we began talking about a lot of different things. And it was one of those, okay, yeah, let's stay in touch, see what happens. And, well, Tom always stayed in touch. I continued to get calls from him. And what we began doing initially was we started exploring locally, Santa Monica Mountains specifically, because Tom had such a deep knowledge of the area. And at that time, I was still relatively new to Southern California. So it started with that, and then we began to become better friends, and we started doing some overnight trips when I had some work in some other areas. I think our first trip was to Zion National Park and to Bryce National Park. And it kind of just grew from there, where I'd have travel to do, Tom wanted to do photography, and we just began going out on the road, and we've been doing that for over 20 years.
What made you think about doing this book in particular?
I have spent 25 years of my life trying to capture the incredible beauty and difference from other parks of the Santa Monica Mountains. So I had the resource. So the question was, how can I find someone to write the text, to write the cultural history, if you will, of the mountains? This is a book about the people of the mountains, and Matthew did an incredible job. Every time I think about it, I sort of get choked up, knowing that nothing existed, and now this exists.
So have you two become friends as well as collaborators?
Very good friends. In fact, I met my wife through Tom and his wife, and Tom's been a big influence in a lot of different ways on me, because again, he really introduced me to the Santa Monicas, which I knew a little bit from doing stories, but I didn't necessarily realize how special they were. And really what began happening is when we were traveling on the road, we would just kind of kick around the idea, should do a book on the Santa Monicas. It's like, yeah. And then one day, Tom had sent out some emails to different publishers, including Angel City Press, and it's not that easy to get a book published. It's even more difficult now than it was then, but as it turns out, Scott McCauley, who's one of the people at Angel City Press, his uncle Milt McCauley was one of the real experts on the Santa Monicas. He did a lot of hiking guides, so when they saw the idea for the book, they immediately recognized its potential, and without really any extra effort, they bought the idea, which was really unusual, I think, in the publishing world, without an agent, nothing like that.
You're very fortunate.
Yes.
Yes.
What was your goal? What was the purpose? Who were you aiming for? What did you want to accomplish by the writing of this book and the photography in it?
Well, from photography, I wanted to make a statement that this Santa Monica Mountains area is unique It's not like the gates of the national park in Alaska. It's not like Yosemite. It is of different character. And to capture the beauty of that, as we were talking earlier, it takes, I mean, you don't make one image or two or three images a year here. You have to wait for the correct moment, the correct atmosphere, the correct contrast. And that was the plan, was to somehow equalize the value of this park. I mean, I was here when we didn't have a park. I've been in Calabasas for 45 years. I've seen the area up and down and in and out, many different, vacillations of what Calabasas was. I remember when the city, we were going to call ourselves Las Virgenes.
Yes.
Agora and Calabasas together as Las Virgenes. Some people still harken back to maybe that's what we should have done, but
We
that's
didn't
beside
have the
the point.
opportunity to do it. It was taken away from us.
Yeah, that's exactly, precisely. So that was my intent. My intent was to try to equalize the value of this, because I mean, 5 o'clock in the morning in Malibu Creek State Park can be one of the most amazing moments, depending upon the atmosphere, depending upon the rain, the wetness, the fog, the brightness, the contrast. There are so many different elements that have to go in to make up the perfect photograph. But I could spend the rest of my life walking in and out of Malibu Creek State Park every day of my life. And truth be told, the studios have, in fact, I just saw, this is my most recent, what's the new one on desert?
Oh, Westworld.
Westworld shot. There was a shot in the rock pool, and you can tell if you know the Santa Monica's. And I know people who know which curve on Mulholland the automobile videos are shot at. Oh, I know where that is. Anyway, this is Westworld, which is a brand new syndicated.
I know the series.
Okay, shot at least one that I've seen. That was a couple nights ago. So there's a lot of movie, and it has represented, as Matt has cataloged in the book, hundreds, if not thousands, of different locations worldwide.
And when you think about the Santa Monicas and all the movies that have been filmed here, and particularly the TV show MASH, we kind of made the argument, and I don't see any disputing it, that these mountains have been seen by more people around the world than any other mountain range. And at the same time, they don't play themselves. They're playing Korea, they're playing the Old West, they're playing Wales. How Green Was My Valley was filmed at Malibu Creek State Park. So because of the movie industry, that's one of the unique cultural aspects of the mountains, how they've been used, mostly as a backdrop. And getting back to some of the original, our original desire to do the book, we were inspired by some of the great Sierra Club books that came out in the 1960s that portrayed areas of the Grand Canyon and different areas that were used as a bit of a rallying cry to preserve these areas. And that kind of book didn't exist in the Santa Monicas. And really, in many ways, the Santa Monicas had not been written about very much. They'd been photographed again a lot in the movies and different things, but they never received the sort of photographic attention that a Yosemite and some of these other major areas had. And Tom, because of his long history here, has really chronicled the mountains in a way that nobody else has. So that was a really important resource. And then it was a matter of, as Tom was saying, putting that together with text that brought the mountains alive, their cultural role, their unique qualities from a natural history perspective, and to do it in a way that was going to appeal to not necessarily a mass audience, but certainly a local audience in Southern California. One of the things that we realize is that a lot of people drive by the mountains. They're on the 101. The mountains are a backdrop. They look like a green wall, a dark green wall. And even a lot of local people really don't know the mountains very well. So between the text and a lot of the photos that Tom was able to get of some of these hidden spots that people had no idea existed in the mountains. I think our desire was to really bring it alive for people and to show them really what's in their own backyard and why it's unique.
Were there any great challenges that you faced in compiling this book?
Yeah, shooting in film. The book is all film. There's no digital in the book. Film, transparency, slides, much more difficult. Much more difficult than digital. You have to, film can't capture as wide a gamut of light from dark to light. So there are all kinds of restrictions that are placed on you by using film.
Do you use a particular kind of camera, make of camera?
All kinds, from 8x10s, which are about this big, the original is that big, to 4x5s, to 6x7, and these days you hardly have to even use any of those. If you use the state-of-the-art 50 and 60 megapixel cameras, you don't even have to, you can just walk around with a Nikon and make right off the sensor, do a 48 by 36 image.
Well, a lot of people refer to the Santa Monica Mountains as a place where all the celebrities live.
Mm-hmm.
And that's good and that's bad. I mean, it gives us the reputation of maybe a little shallow, but at least it draws their attention to the great beauty that's attracted these people who can live anywhere.
Well, it's testimony to the quality of the mountains.
And the mountains also inspired a lot of the people who lived in the different canyons. I mean, the mountains played a huge role in 1960s music. Laurel Canyon was a major music center. Topanga was. And then when you go further back, it also inspired some of the most notable architects who've worked in Southern California, Frank Lloyd Wright, Neutra. You know, it's really remarkable. Schindler. It's really remarkable the world-class architecture that exists in the mountains, in addition to some architecture that's really grandiose and a little bit gaudy, as we've seen. But the mountains have played a really unique cultural role in terms of the people who've lived here. One of the little events that we mentioned is that during the Bel Air fire, which was one of the most notorious fires, Richard Nixon was on the roof of his...
Wasn't that in the 60s? Then?
Yeah, it was 61, I believe. I could be wrong about that.
That's when I moved back to California, Southern California.
Yeah.
I remember that.
And that fire was unique in terms of its presence in a very, very affluent area and burning through some of the most expensive real estate in the area. But there was an anecdote of Richard Nixon after he had lost the 1960 presidential election. He was working on his memoirs and living in the Bel Air area, and he was up on his roof having watered down his roof. The only meeting between Elvis and the Beatles took place in the Santa Monica Mountains because Elvis was staying, had a house, and then the Beatles were here for their concert at the Hollywood Bowl. So there are little things like that where the mountains played a backdrop for these cultural events, some more important than others, but unique nonetheless.
Well, it's amazing. The mountains are kind of a dividing line between two sections of Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm. They really do define the city. Los Angeles, as we know it, would be a totally different place without the Santa Monicas. And in addition to just creating that geographical structure, they also, one of the things that distinguishes Los Angeles from other cities is its wildness. And when people talk about fires and mountain lions, obviously been getting a lot of attention in recent years, that's the Santa Monicas that they're referring to.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to take a very quick break.
Thank you for having us.
I'm asking you to stick with us for Range on the Edge and our guest today at Authors Night.
Stop pretending we have plenty of water. Los Angeles is in a drought, but there are ways you can help. Replacing lawns with rain gardens and California-friendly plants is just one of many solutions. For more info on conserving water and saving energy, please visit LADWP and the Bay Foundation online.
We're back, Authors Night, with Range on the Edge with our two guests, Matt Jaffe and Tom Gamache. We had just mentioned that the Santa Monica Mountains divides Los Angeles. Have there been groups cooperating on both sides of the mountain to save the Santa Monica Mountains?
Yeah, I think there's been a range-wide effort. For example, after the book came out, we spoke to homeowners groups near Griffith Park. We've spoken to people out this way. I think that over the years, and frankly, I think the book has helped in this regard. At one time, I think there was a sense, well, the Hollywood Hills are here, and the western part of the range is something separate. But the Hollywood Hills are part of the Santa Monica Mountains, and I think that there's much more of a sense of the range as a single entity rather than individual sections depending on where people are living. And I think that some of the groups have cooperated a lot more in that regard, that, you know, somebody might be more out in Calabasas, Thousand Oaks, Newbury Park, wherever it happens to be. But there is kind of a collaborative effort to preserve the mountains as a whole. And I think we're also seeing again, with the mountain lions, I think we're getting more of a sense of, especially as one of the mountain lions moved all the way through the range, that again, it is a single entity rather than a separate.
So it's just a geographical divide, not a division of class, cultures, or anything else.
No, and also there's been a real effort to get kids from other parts of Los Angeles into the mountains, because for a lot of them, this is their closest access to, if not necessarily wilderness, wildness, because a lot of kids aren't going to have access to Yosemite and Sequoia National Parks, whereas they are getting school groups out, and for a lot of kids, it's their first opportunity to be in an area that feels wild, that feels natural, you know, where they've got dirt under their feet instead of concrete.
How did the mountains become settled?
Ooh, how did the mountains? Let me say one last thing about the superlative effort of the people who live here. Amundsen. That Amundsen Ranch, saving Amundsen Ranch, was one of the most amazing land acquisition efforts ever conducted anywhere. This went all the way to Seattle. Rob Reiner bought ads in the Seattle newspaper castigating the bank there for not doing in Seattle what they did here, having different ethics here. They were trying to stop the process here, and they were trying to do the opposite in Seattle. Anyway, from that all the way down to 1 acre plots that the National Parks has coveted. In fact, we just opened the Backbone Trail now exists all the way up in Etzmole Parkway near the end of the mountain range. They just got, and they don't even own the land, they have an easement across the land. So this has been an ongoing effort for, when does the parks? 30 years, 35 years here, 30 years probably?
78, right?
Yeah. Anyway, that's my comment on how the people are involved. And this took everybody. I won't give you the people who would do it.
Well, a council member, Janice Lee.
Janice? Oh, absolutely.
She was just an individual.
Yes.
And I don't use it disparaging the word just, but people didn't know her. Mm-hmm. And she made it her life's work to rescue the project, the Amundsen, and give it back to the people as an open space, what it is
did a
today.
lot of photography up there.
And she made her way to the city council, and
Yes.
Too bad she doesn't live here anymore.
Yes.
But she did come back for the anniversary.
See her. I did say hello to her just a few months ago, was
Yes.
it not? Yes, indeed. Good to see her. And then there's somebody who should be mentioned again and again and again, Dave Brown.
Dave Brown, an icon.
Mm. Now, when I think of Dave, that's when I get emotional.
He was a good friend to both my husband and me. A wealth of knowledge No one else, practically no one else has.
Well, I remember sitting with his maps and his highlight colored maps, and we were trying to figure out what's the best vantage point to get a photograph from here, of the piece of property that the National Parks was trying to buy. Or
Where did all his maps and papers go?
his son, likely. I'm not sure. I don't know, to tell you the truth.
And Dave really helped introduce the mountains to me because I was working on some articles for Sunset, and Tom said, "Oh, you got to give Dave Brown a call," and I did, and we were on the phone. I remember the first time we were probably on the phone for 2 hours, and he just had a depth of knowledge that was incredible, and he also had the ability to convey it. And not sometimes when people get so focused on a subject, they're not able to reach out to a layman such as myself, but he really was able to explain things. And he had been a teacher, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
History teacher, I
Yeah.
believe.
History at Valley College.
He was on our first planning commission.
I was on the
And
planning
there-
commission a long time.
Absolutely, for many
He does have one of the most beautiful overlooks in the Santa Monicas.
That was named after him.
Overlook named after him.
Really?
Oh
I
yes,
didn't know that.
yeah, right there, looking down
Piuma Road.
Piuma, up on Piuma, almost to the top. There's a horseshoe curve, and he's right up
Certainly
top.
well deserving of the gentleman.
Please.
Well, he's very much missed here. Where do the Santa Monica Mountains actually begin and the termination? Both, I don't know where one begins and one ends, or if it's interchangeable. But
That was
beginning and
actually one of the
termination.
more challenging aspects, is to really define what are the mountains. On the west side, you can see the mountains as drop basically to the Oxnard Plain. It's very defined. But as you get toward downtown, they kind of fade out into different smaller hills and things. But we determined, for example, that Dodger Stadium is actually within the Santa Monica Mountains. So essentially the LA River, where the mountains drop down at the 5, that's pretty much the eastern boundary of the Santa Monica Mountains. But I was fortunate. I had found a publication that was put out actually for a class at UCLA that gave very specific definitions of the boundaries of the mountains. And off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly how far down it came, but essentially Sunset Boulevard. I mean, the two writers ended up using very precise definitions. And then years later, my mother, who was living in Tucson, she was in her 80s, and she got involved with this gentleman who had been a biology professor at UCLA, and his name seemed familiar, and sure enough, he was one of the co-authors of this document that, again, was a really critical help to the book, just again because we really needed something that defined strictly what the mountains were, because we wanted to mention things like Dodger Stadium, because I think that puts the range into a different context for people, where they understand just how central it really is to Los Angeles. And I think most people go to a Dodger game and they're not giving much thought to what these hills actually are.
Well, it's always the Hollywood Hills. It's never the Santa Monica Mountains.
And then it goes all the way up down to Malibu.
Yeah, the range continues on, and what I've noticed in recent years, you're starting to see the term Malibu Hills more often, and as far as I can tell, that was never used historically. And again, that waters down the notion of the Santa Monicas as a specific mountain range when you begin to put these different names on sections of the range. So it's one of our hopes, again, that the book creates that definition.
A tremendous amount of recreational opportunities in the mountains. That's what makes it so special to me, having been in public and private recreation. But how old are the mountains?
Well, let's start with where the mountains came from.
Okay, we can do that.
If you can imagine the Sierra Nevada ends around the Tehachapis, right? When you're going north on 395. The Tehachapis begin what's the word I'm looking for?
Transverse.
The transverse-ness. They turn sideways, the Tehachapis. And then as an extension of that, the Santa Monicas, once the Tehachapi's come down, in the San Gabriels and things. Is that what am I saying it right?
I'm not sure.
But the curve is like this with the Santa Monicas.
Yeah, I think the important thing to realize about the Santa Monicas is that they're in Southern California, you have the transverse ranges that actually start with the San Bernardino Mountains, San Gabriel, Santa Monicas, all the way to the San Ynez. And what's unique about these ranges is that they run east-west. They're among the only ranges in the country. I think the Uintas and
Uintas up in Utah
also
about
go
the only other one,
east-west.
yeah.
But if you really think about most of the mountain ranges in the country, they're north-south. In my understanding, and I'm a little rusty on the geology, was that the San Andreas Fault basically kind of created a pivot that shifted these mountains into an east-west direction. And then even the Channel Islands are an extension of the Santa Monicas, because if you go to the western part of the range and do some of the hikes up there at the western extent of the Backbone Trail, and you look out, you can see that the Channel Islands are in a perfect line with the Santa Monicas. And at one time, if they weren't literally connected as one single landmass, there was a very narrow channel that separated the islands from the Santa Monicas. But again, I'm a little rusty on the geology.
But chronologically, what age, what number would you give to them?
I'd have
If
to
it's
cheat and look in the
possible.
book.
I'm sorry.
100 years old, 200, 300 years
Oh,
old?
no, millions.
Millions?
Millions.
Millions.
Millions. Let's round it out.
Okay.
100, 200 million years,
My
absolutely.
sense is that they're a relatively young range.
Which is young,
Yeah.
considering the age of the Earth.
Created how? You say by the Sen.
Well, it's the Garlock and the San Andreas. And if you look at the San Andreas Fault, here's Los Angeles. You go from southern, if you will, California out to the desert, and then this way, this is a block, and if you can imagine it turning, twisting.
Over the millions of years.
Here's the Sierra Nevada, here are the Tehachapis, and here are the Santa Monicas. You have this turning block behind it, which is bending these mountains and turning them back on themselves. These are the Santa Monicas out here. These are the Tehachapis and others here. And these are the Sierra coming down.
Is there still a lot of movement in that direction?
Oh, tremendous. Oh, yeah. We await it.
Well, let's wait a few minutes, get into another quick break, and
Okay.
come back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay with us.
Where is this guy? So thirsty.
I hear he travels from the north.
Look!
That one's really dry.
LA is in a drought, yet over half of our drinking water is being used for landscaping. But it doesn't have to be that way. Just 1 inch of rain can yield thousands of gallons of water for use in landscaping and saves drinking water for drinking. Rain barrels, cisterns, and curb cuts are just a few ways to save water and energy. For more, visit LADWP and the Bay Foundation online.
We're back with our guests, Matt Jaffe, Tom Gamache, Range on the Edge. What do you mean by the title, Range on the Edge?
Matthew is the originator of the title. I will let him speak.
Okay.
It had multiple meanings, and it was, I have to say, titles of books, it's one of the toughest things to come up with. But I think it referred to both the literal geography of the range, the way it runs along the coast. I think it also refers to the vulnerability of these mountains to development and to an assortment of changes, because being in a Mediterranean climate like this, this is, as we know, Southern California is one of the most desirable areas in the world to live. And when you have interesting topography and the sort of views the Santa Monicas offer, that's one of the reasons why there's been so much development pressure. And so again, this is one of the most desirable areas in the world to live. And obviously there are millions and millions of people. And it's really been pretty remarkable how much of these mountains have been saved. But it's an ongoing battle, because there's always some new development that's coming in that's going to chip away at the integrity of the mountains from an environmental perspective. So I think those were the main points that I wanted to convey with the name. So it's not any one single thing, but you know, there was a time, I think, when the mountains, again, not that they're not under pressure now, but when there was talk at one time of putting in a freeway over basically where Dirt Mulholland runs. That was a huge battle in the late 70s to protect that. There was at one time Reseda Boulevard was going to be was going to be a freeway, and all these things would have really disrupted the mountains as a living place. I mean, we see it with the mountain lions. The fact that their inability to get across the 101 freeway has made them incredibly vulnerable. Now, you could imagine if you had other freeways cutting across the mountains, you wouldn't have been able to maintain the population that we even have now.
Malibu Canyon was on the books in the 50s as a freeway, a 6-lane or 4-lane freeway, hung out over the canyon. On the books, there are copies of the maps available.
With your love of not just Calabasas, but of the mountains and the magnificent photographs that are in your book, how do you share this love? Do you give classes, workshops? Do you pass on your knowledge or your respect for the mountains?
That's very interesting, because for almost 20 years I offered workshops everywhere, from all the national parks in California. We would do a end of the first week of December here, because that's the peak of sycamore color in Southern California. We would do a workshop in Malibu Creek State Park. Attended 10, 12, 15 people every year would attend. And then all of a sudden, phonology intruded. In other words, photography, learning photography, thinking about what you're doing, learning the principles of art, it's gone.
We were talking about that earlier.
It has disappeared. Photography as we know it from 1839 until, let's go back to 2010. That's stage 1 of photography. We're now in what's called stage 2, but I call it phonography. In other words, pictures by phone. And that seems to be what the manufacturers of these phones seem to be doing. They're promoting it as a camera. On television, on leaflets, in stores, they're promoting your phone as a camera. And they're spending a lot of money doing it. So it's the idea that you have made an image with this device somehow precludes an inquisitiveness into the how of photography. How does the camera work? How does my mind work? How do I see? We only see what we expect to see. I mean, that is one of the most important maxims of all picture making, whether it's painting or photography. If you're not aware and you haven't educated yourself and informed yourself as to what's possible through imitation, through failure, through all of these wonderful devices, then you'll never make a serious photograph.
And people are satisfied with mediocrity?
People are quite satisfied. They believe that they should go no further. Well, they're spending $800 on a phone, $1,000 on a phone.
From a layman's perspective, not being a professional photographer, on one hand, for me, using digital is very forgiving.
I can see for a snapshot to say, here, this is where I'm at the Eiffel Tower, here I am, folks, and send it on, but for serious photographs?
Right. I only use my phone for, the people shots. I actually have, a real camera, but I'm not a professional photographer. But I was speaking with Kim Weston, who is Edward Weston's son, or grandson, I guess.
Grandson.
Yeah.
They're all, the whole primary family.
His
is
grandson,
gone.
and he does photo workshops. And one of the things that he was saying is that what he's saying is that because of digital, people are more careless about composition and things like that. When you were shooting, whether you were shooting large format or just a roll of film, you had to be much more selective about what you were going to shoot. And one of the things that he wanted to convey is that, you still need to be, if you want to take a good photograph, it can't be scattershot. You might get lucky, you might get a pretty good image. But what he was saying is that people have lost the ability to look for what is truly a good shot because they no longer need to be as selective as they once were about what they're going to photograph.
There's just the impetus to get better, to learn, to educate is absent. It's gone. Cars are too easy to drive. Cameras are too easy to work. Computers are too easy to work. That's where we are in the culture.
Immediate gratification.
Make it easy, and I don't want to think beyond this point.
And unfortunately, you say it goes into the television advertising too, the things we see on TV, the photographs?
Don't get me going on TV. I had someone...
Don't get him going on TV, please.
Don't, please. In fact, here we are in the library. I took out a couple of books the other day. One was on the Black Death of in Europe's 1400s, 1500s, and a couple other books. And as I was checking out, the librarian looks at me and she says, "Oh, light reading." And I said, "My light reading is on television, because there's nothing worth spending your time."
No, I don't watch TV.
And yet it's
very, very little.
And yet it consumes us. It consumes our time.
It's easy.
Well, not only that, it's classic photography, a print on a wall. These prints, these are all reflected art. This is light that's reflected off the art back in our eyes. Digital, on the other hand, is backlit. The light comes through the image at you, much more powerful to command you, to control you, much more powerful. That's what television has. In fact, if you want to sleep at night, which I've been investigating, I read a book, Arianna Huffington book on the miracle of sleep. You should never watch television for the last 2 hours of your...
Same thing with being on your computer.
Yeah, well, that's it. No. All what I mean by
All
TV
electronics.
is video. All video, anything backlit. And it controls you. It controls us as a nation. And it relates to how much you know and how much you want to know.
Well, it's easy to get opinions. It's easy to take a picture. It's easy to get a drug. Just turn on the TV and they tell you what to think. They tell you what to buy to cure
Everything's
what
too
illness.
easy, much too easy.
And ineffective.
Well, for them, for the corporate structure
Oh,
of the
well.
world, it's quite effective. It's there.
But not for the individual who's watching,
no.
who's trying to learn something and
no.
trying to cure a
Impossible.
disease. Doesn't solve
But
any issues, any problems.
It's the godsend for consumerism. It's the godsend.
Do you develop your own photographs, by the way?
No. Well, you don't have to develop today, but I never did.
You never did.
Well, black and white. In the very early days, black and white, yes. I did a lot of darkroom work. But color film, I had labs that would do incremental development. In other words, I could shoot a roll of film in a certain fashion. Mm-hmm. I could push it, I could pull it, meaning I could overuse it, underuse it, and I would tell the lab how much time to put this in this specific role in a developer.
So you go to an outside lab, huh?
I did back then. You can't. There's only one lab left in the city of LA. that'll do slides, E6. There's only one lab left, and it's very expensive.
Well, you had a choice of going digital or print for your book. Did
Oh,
you?
there was no digital books back then. The book is what, 7, 8 years old?
Well, there probably were, but I think the main thing is we always envisioned it as a larger format book, something that people would keep, settle in with. I don't think you have remotely the same experience if you were to read this text and look at the photos online. The quality of the paper, things like that, I think are really important. And we also wanted the book to be something that was comfortable for people to read in the sense that it opened up easily. And I think it's going to have a much greater lasting value, the fact that it is printed. And I think in the future, I mean, who knows, there's so much that's online, how much of that's actually going to be saved, whereas the investment that goes into a book, that goes into a magazine, that goes into a printed newspaper, I think is greater. There's just not to mention the fact people going to the trouble of buying the book and reading it is a whole different level of commitment than simply looking at it online.
Well, I know we can check it out here in the library. We have a copy. What about where can a person purchase the book?
It's readily available on Amazon, probably also still Barnes & Noble. But yeah, you can definitely find it on Amazon. And it's in some bookstores. It's also in the bookstore in the Visitor Center at King Gillette Ranch, right here in the mountains.
Do you think that development has spoiled Calabasas, spoiled the Santa Monica Mountains? Is our environment threatened? Be blunt. That's why you're here. It must hurt you to see some things that go on. It must be very painful.
Very painful, very emotional. I can relate to virtually every inch of the mountains. I mean, I've hiked every trail, I've photographed almost every single vantage point, every panorama, every detail. There was a time when I spent 5 years doing nothing but wildflowers, down on my hands and knees learning. What do you do? How do you get this thing to light up, to jump out of the film? We're in a state of education paralysis. In other words, people are less inclined to learn. The average person is less inclined to strike out on their own and learn, to select an idea, a direction, meaning that, as you mentioned earlier, television tells us, the video tells us, everything is about telling us. So if we don't have the inquisitiveness to inform ourselves what is around us, whether it's culturally, whether it's politically, whether it's consumer-wise, and how it all works. I've been championing for 40, 50 years of my life, ever since our first child was born. In fact, I once stood up and was called a communist at Lupin Hill School for suggesting that we teach 3rd and 4th and 5th graders how capitalism works, how consumerism works, how it works. If I can go to this library right here and I can ascertain, I can pick up a book on how advertising works written for adults, the history of an advertising agency, the history of the director of the advertising, the biography of the director. Why is that an adult subject only?
Especially when they're targeting children.
I rest my case. I rest my case. I mean, why don't we educate? Are we fearful that the knowledge, that the economic system that we have, are we fearful that somehow something tragic will happen if people figure out how it works?
I think we're just ignorant as to the ability of a young child to understand. They understand more than we expect them to. They're quite smart.
Oh, they're very smart. What's difficult of you give, I take from you, I mean, it's a very simple, capitalism is a very simple, and consumerism, it's a very simple premise.
What do you feel that we, the residents of Calabasas, should commit to in the future? What should we be looking for here in Calabasas?
What are your thoughts, Matthew?
I think the city needs to. I haven't been here as long as I've been here about 16 years now. I think the city, in some ways, has strayed from its origins. The city came about as a way to gain local control over development, to do development in a smart fashion, and most importantly, to have a community that's directly connected to the natural world. And I think the problem is that what happens is there can be, you say, here's one development, it's just one thing. But there's a cumulative impact of all these different developments, especially close to where Tom lives, in the area of Malibu Canyon, around Agora Road and Las Virgenes. And
the west side, just call it the west side.
Call it the west side. Where, it's just one thing after another. There are new proposals now. And the problem is you wake up one day and the place that you've known and loved is no longer the same place.
But what do you do when, in the right of an American double-edged sword, you have the right to do what you want to do with what you own, and so should somebody else if they own a piece of land?
Up to a point.
Up to a point.
But it's the pursuit of happiness is the hook. That's the problem. The pursuit of happiness for you and the very same pursuit for me are entirely different. And yet that is one of the fundamentals of our society. And the pursuit of happiness. You hear it everywhere. And if you want to be happy, the premise is you can do what you want that helps you pursue your own personal happiness. I can do the same thing. And when they diverge, when they're not together, then you have problems.
But if you've taken a role of being a spokesperson to fight for what you believe in?
Then you need media. Often that's another bit. We haven't spoken a bit of media, about media and how media has changed. And especially with what you're talking about, the reportage. In other words, Matthew, off the top of your head, how many people have been let go from the LA Times? I mean, the city desk doesn't exist anymore.
The paper gets skinnier and skinnier. It
Yeah,
takes
the
me
city
an hour
desk,
in the morning to read the New York Times, 10 minutes to go through the LA Times, if that.
Right. But all the reporters, 90% of the reporters are gone.
Yes.
Yeah, it may not be quite that high, but
Well, I think so, because I find articles in it that I've seen elsewhere.
Oh, yeah.
no, they're using a lot more wire service.
Yeah.
They acquired the San Diego Union Tribune. Suddenly they're filling space with articles out of San Diego that never would have run in the LA Times previously. And I'm from Chicago originally. I don't mind seeing some Chicago coverage, but just by virtue of their ties to the Chicago Tribune, there are articles that seem to appear that, again, I would not have expected to see in the Los Angeles Times, especially in a Los Angeles Times that's so diminished. But in terms of the city, I think what I'd like to see is that there have been some really major victories that the city of Calabasas has played a role in, Amundsen Ranch, King Gillette Ranch, but you can't be satisfied with some of those victories because you really have to remain vigilant about other things that are happening. And we see it in local elections, how low the turnout is, and most people are not engaged in what happens locally, which allows certain candidates to prosper because there's not as much of attention being paid to the elections. And I'm not citing any individuals, but when you have less than 20% turnout, which I think is generally what it is, that really leaves the door wide open for all sorts of, I don't want to say manipulation. What's a good word, Tom?
Well, manipulation sounds good to me.
Okay.
I want to thank you, gentlemen, very much for your candidness, for your brilliance, and for a magnificent book that should be in everyone's home library. And it's been a pleasure. I know I've been after Tom Gamache for a long while, and I finally...
You got me too.
I got two. So it was certainly worth waiting for.
Thank you for inviting
And
us.
it's an honor.
Thank you.
I want to leave with the as people know, I often try and quote somebody that I feel appropriate for the occasion. And after reading your book from cover to cover, the words of Pablo Picasso: "The meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away." And you gentlemen found your gift and made it your life's work, which is more than most people can say that they've been able to do. And then you've given it to us, not only in a book, but by your interview today. And for that I am most grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.